Happy Pride Month, everyone! To celebrate, I made this quick little mini video essay about heteronormativity in the Fire Emblem franchise. We're going to primarily be talking about Engage here and the various ways it gave us more gay, as well as not enough gay. Everyone following so far? Good. And hey, maybe you could go ahead and subscribe real quick. It's Pride Month. Make a trans girl smile. And with that out of the way, we're going to start by talking about the earliest thing you possibly do in Engage, character creation. Character creation in Fire Emblem has been in the games for a long time, but really only became popular after Awakening. The idea with character creation is to be able to create, well, you, and self-insert into the game experience. Awakening introduced a fairly complex character creator, and that introduced some problems because not everyone was actually able to make themselves. I know New Mystery did it first, but no one played that in the West. What you'll immediately notice is that you must first pick the character's gender before anything else. Gender in Awakening is strongly tied to the gameplay mechanics, and determines what classes you can be, what pair-ups you have available, the gender of Morgan, and probably some other things I'm not thinking of. The point is, the gameplay systems themselves were designed around a binary system of gender that prioritized straight relationships for gameplay purposes. In order to get children units, every character needed to be paired up with someone of the opposite gender, and if you wanted to play optimally, you had to make sure as many units as possible had access to Dark Fire for Gale Force. This caused Awakening to center its entire gameplay experience around a binary understanding of both sex and gender. Since then, we've had some lackluster changes to that system. Fates allowed you a single gay pairing option, and made it impossible to get all children in the game if you used it. Shadows of Valentia introduced a singular gay character, only to have him locked into bachelorhood for the entire game. Three Houses increased the number of gay pairings without DLC to 3 for men and 5 for women, but when one of the gay men wants to fuck your dad and one of the lesbian women is definitely related to you, the number of valid pairings is actually a lot lower. All of these attempts at queer rep since Awakening have really felt like throwaway attempts to say, yeah, we have gays in Fire Emblem. The base systems of that gameplay are still designed to prioritize opposite gender relationships, and gay options often feel like an exception to the rule that doesn't always work well. And that brings us to Engage. Engage's character creator begins not by asking our gender, but by asking for our form. This is similar language to what was used in Three Houses, and shows a conscious effort to improve the game's queer representation by making the two forms of Allier technically ungendered. So, one woke point for intelligent systems. However, the game doesn't do a great job of maintaining gender-neutral language throughout the game. While in most dialogue, Allier's pronouns are honestly Divine One, Vale's storyline about her long-lost brother or sister end up gendering Allier regardless. There's probably a lot of other places where they did something like this, and I'm sure you can point some out in the comments. These are inconsistencies with the writing of the game, and they help us to see that the writers weren't careful with their language to keep it inclusive. They fall back on a gender binary, likely by accident, which leaves the character creator's use of the word forms to feel somewhat performative. I don't even really want the game to use exclusively gender-neutral language for Allier. I'm a binary woman, I want the game to use she, her. But I don't want that to be exclusively tied to a body that looks any sort of way, and I want non-binary people to be able to create themselves in the system the same way everyone else can. I really think having a pronoun picker would go a long way here. It's the best way to be really inclusive, and unfortunately, they're still way too uncommon in video games as a whole. But there are other problems with character creation, and these are actually unique to Engage. In Engage, you can customize a character's outfit however you see fit, a first for the series. But these outfits are needlessly gendered, with men and women getting access to different ones. Some exceptions are made, for example, Rosado identifies as male but has access to feminine outfits. Which leads me to question, why can't Allier, the character who is supposed to represent you, be an exception? Ever since Saints Row 3 released in 2011, gaming has done a good job of moving away from gender-locked outfits. I find Engage's customization options to be needlessly restricted and outdated. I'm sure someone will tell me how the models are made for a specific body type and blah 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 blah, but half of these outfits clip into female Allier's hair anyways. I'm sure no one would mind if giving her pants looked a little wonky. Especially when Rosado is already in the game, breaking the gender binary like it's nobody's business, and proving there are no technical limitations stopping them. This inconsistency honestly pushes a harmful message. We can look at gender non-conforming characters, but we can't practice it ourselves. It's no secret that men dressing in women's clothing, often referred to as femboys, or a slur I can't say on YouTube, are very popular in Japanese media. But if we aren't allowed to have the stand-in for ourselves in the story practice gender nonconformity, it can feel performative at best and fetishy at worst. But we'll revisit this when we talk about writing later. For now, I want to move on to the last piece of character customization, class. It's no secret that Fire Emblem has always gender-locked the Pegasus Knight class to only women. The only game to break that rule is Fates. And in Engage, the 3 flyer classes, Sword, Axe, and Lance Flyer, are all locked to only women. Even Rosado is unable to ride a winged horse, though he'd look pretty fabulous if he could. This is probably the place the gender binary is at its most rigid in Fire Emblem, and also the place people want it removed the most. Not all classes are created equal, and the Pegasus line of classes is usually one of the best in the game. In Engage, this is the only gender-locked class, but older games have had it much worse. I mean, Three Houses' pointless gender divisions basically killed the entire Dark Mage line. People have been calling for the end of gender-locked classes for a long time now, and I'm willing to throw my hat into that ring. It's a really annoying restriction in the game's sandbox, upheld simply because, I guess IS feels men shouldn't be riding around on dainty little winged horses, and women shouldn't be beating the shit out of entire armies with their bare hands. I think gender-locked classes really show the limit of IS's imagination and willingness to push gender binaries, because even the rules they made up themselves are immutable and unbreakable for the characters. But let's not pile on for too long. I like to move away from primarily gameplay concerns and move on to the writing more explicitly. Let's start by talking about the pairing system. I mentioned it earlier, but Fire Emblem has always had an issue with the very binary enforcing system of pairing. In Awakening, everyone was meeting their kids from the future, so the game enforced strict gender policies and left queer relationships out. This system has remained steadfastly in place in Fates and Three Houses, barring a few exceptions. Engage decided to handle pairing really weird. First of all, they got rid of paired endings for any character unless they are paired with a Lear. Not just weird. Paired endings have been around technically since the first game with Marth and Sita, and they're probably the best way to reward players for completing a support chain. Now we have a system where endings only change based on who a Lear is paired with, and no other characters have endings. However, they did finally decide to drop gender from the pairing system, allowing players to romantically pursue any person who is legally old enough, or apparently just anybody in the Japanese version. It's nice how the system finally allow any gay pairing you want, though it's weird that this comes with the caveat of as long as a Lear is in it. It's both a step forward and a significantly stripped back system. I want to mention here that I don't like this new system because it just makes everyone bi. We don't have any gay or lesbian rep. I like to call this the Stardew Valley approach, and in some games I do actually like it. But Fire Emblem is a series centered around the idea that the characters are their own people with unique personalities. It's central to the game that these characters have to feel real, so, you're sad when they die. And part of being real is having diverse expressions of sexuality. So I do want some characters to be exclusively gay or lesbian. I even want some characters to be exclusively straight, provided of course that this is not treated as the default the way it has been in the past. I want characters like Leon in Shadows of Valentia who explicitly comment on their sexuality in their dialogue. I want a system that allows us to have asexual and aromantic characters who don't necessarily pair up with anyone, and widen the spectrum of sexuality portrayed in the game. When everyone is bi, or change their gender preferences based on player choice, there are many types of stories we just can't tell. Fire Emblem has a unique and honestly kind of beautiful way of telling stories, but this approach to romance hinders its ability to actually tell them. I want characters to be able to talk about their attraction to each other explicitly in their supports, but they can't do that when the writers have to worry about locking out players from certain options. Engage probably has the most queer subtext out of any Fire Emblem game I've ever played, but we can't even get "they were roommates" paired endings anymore out of the current pairing system. In my opinion, the systems in Engage are one step forward and also one step back for queer rep. But again, let's not dogpile on the same point for too long. Let's talk about the reason you're all here. The guy in the thumbnail, Rosado. Rosado is one in a long list of Fire Emblem femboys, and I really want to talk about the way he's written. The philosophy behind Rosado's writing is actually very similar to the everyone is bi system. What I mean by that is, the point of both is to represent as many people as possible rather than to represent a specific person. You'll see what I mean by that in a moment, but let's take a step back. Femboys are extremely popular in Japanese media and not always handled well. Often they're used as the butt of the "I'm actually a guy" joke and exist more for comic relief than representation. And that is the nicest way I can say it. Rosado usually stays away from this joke. He has a lot of supports where he talks about painting, for example, but more often than not, his supports center around his gender expression and beauty. It's handled more respectfully than the "I'm actually a guy" joke usually is, but if there was a Bechdel test for how often a gender non-conforming person talks about their gender in media, Rosado would fail that test. However, Rosado isn't always consistent on how he describes his own gender. Usually, Rosado's conversations about gender always resolve into "I'm really a guy, I just like to dress cute." But there's one support where Rosado talks about his hometown, a place where gender didn't matter, and implies he doesn't see himself in terms of gender at all. The language in this dialogue really makes Rosado seem non-binary, despite explicitly gendered as male everywhere else. For me, this is very similar to the "everyone is bi" effect. Everyone isn't actually bi, they're actually written to be as many sexualities as possible all at once. Similarly, Rosado is written that way in terms of his gender, and Rosado kind of has to be many different gender expressions at once because Rosado is the only gender non-conforming character in the game. Where are, for example, the gender non-conforming women? The closest we have is Etienne, the butch tomboy who still wears a skirt and crop top into battle. Seriously, why can't we have one woman wearing men's clothes? Why are there still 0 trans people? Why does no one use they/them pronouns in the entire game? Because of this, Rosado has to be so many different things to so many different people. He's written to encompass a certain range of gender expression, so his writing kind of goes all over the place sometimes. Rosado being the only character who doesn't explicitly fall into the gender binary says a lot about how IS views gender. Actually, I want to talk about the early critiques of Engage here when people were saying all of the women have the same face. And it's kind of true. They have the same face and similar body types and kind of look alike. The men have a larger degree of variation, having more characters that present older, and even characters who break traditional gender binaries. This is probably my biggest problem with Engage and what inspired me to write this essay in the first place. Intelligent Systems needs women who, ultimately, sell banners on their mobile game, which means women who appeal to the male gaze. The men have more varied expressions of self because they aren't dressing up for anyone but themselves. The women, on the other hand, get pigeonholed into boxes based on what IS thinks will appeal to straight men. The appeal to straight men is also the primary reason why Rosado is the only gender non-conforming character. Specifically, Rosado is a femboy, and straight men do find femboys attractive. And that's why we see so many femboys in Fire Emblem, because straight men find them attractive. Forrest, Libra, Lucius, the list goes on. Rosado is probably the most outright feminine of these characters, besides debatably Forrest, and I think that's amazing. But I'm tired of these characters being the only ones who break gender binary in Fire Emblem, and I'm tired of them doing it because men find them attractive. We don't see trans characters or other forms of gender nonconformity because men apparently don't find them attractive. We can't even customize our own characters to fill in those gaps. And I think that really sucks. And with that, I feel we've reached the end of our essay. Fire Emblem is a series with a huge queer fan base, and I'm continually sad that it does such a poor job of appealing to us. I'm tired of representation being small scrapes of queer-coded dialogue when the majority of the game's systems still don't support queer characters. I'm tired of being presented with worlds of magic and wonder, only for the authors to have no imagination beyond the strict gender roles of our own world. Fire Emblem is a story designed to make you care about characters, and it could be amazing if those characters were more diverse. But unfortunately, we're just not there yet. Okay, I don't know how to end this because I don't want everyone feeling sad. The great news is, we do have an amazing community. Every gap in representation IS leaves is filled with tons of fan art, fiction, and even game-changing mods. Fire Emblem has an amazing community of queer gamers who put in the time to make it feel more accepting than the games ever do. So if you're one of those people, thank you. And now we really do have to end the video. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Bye!